Welcome everybody to Out of the Depths, a live stream series by Drift Outfitters. These presentations are designed to expose you to new locations and opportunities across Canada, along with the guides and instructors that you need to know. If you're interested in experiencing these opportunities, we highly suggest you hire the guides that we are featuring on the series. Their in-depth and invaluable knowledge will elevate your experience on the water. Don't struggle when you don't have to, and make the most of your time on the water. If you do find these presentations useful and entertaining, consider supporting the shop and supporting you with these live streams. Buying direct from manufacturers or big box stores directly cuts out your local fly shops, the shops that can best provide the service that you need, host community building events, and contribute to preserving and protecting your local waterways. Ask yourself, are the businesses that you're supporting you? Shop with us in shop, online, or by phone, and remember that orders over $175 ship free within Canada. This week's guest is Nick Roman, a recent guest. I'm sure many remember from his awesome bass talk. From other previous talks. Nick is actually not a guy. He's one of the very few folks that we have on who's not an industry person, but certainly has all the knowledge that a guy would. So who knows? Maybe one day you can book him.
Man, if I had some time, I'd love to. I mean, that's kind of why I like doing these things, right? It's just staying in touch with the community, and if I had the free time and I could keep my day job, that would certainly be of interest to me. But not at this time with the two kids at home, unfortunately.
That's fair enough. This is as close as we're going to get with you, I guess.
For now, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I know you're pretty open if anyone has questions afterwards too. So good to have you back.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for having me. I mean, I love doing these things, and I have kind of an interesting topic to talk about tonight. I sort of felt like it was something that I'd not heard anybody else talk about in the past, and it's something that I have quite a bit of experience in. It's really the reason why I wanted to talk about it was I grew up fishing lakes that are in the backcountry, and I often felt like I didn't really grow up in the correct province. I don't know if you felt like that at some point in your angling journey, especially when you're watching a lot of media and a lot of stuff about how amazing the Rocky Mountains are and all these amazing remote backcountry places are. And so I didn't really realize that we had those kinds of opportunities here, especially with some of the still water opportunities that we really have an ample supply, but yet not a lot of people are taking advantage of these. And about, I don't know, I'd say it was about 8 years ago, I started fishing, actually probably even longer than that, maybe about 10 years ago. I started fishing some of the back lakes for Splake, and I had a lot of success for it. And I kind of felt like it was my own little thing that I'd started to piece together because there was nothing online about it. I couldn't really find any resources tailored to fly fishing for that species. So I was really happy to get invited to talk about a fishery, and being that it is a readily accessible fishery here in Ontario, there's a lot of places to go. I don't think I'm going to hotspot anything too bad or anything like that. And it just felt like the right choice to talk about today. So I hope everyone will get something of value.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And it's one of those opportunities that I've neglected myself. Like you look at stocking reports, and we've got lots of stocked brook trout lakes, stocked rainbow lakes and stuff, but a lot of them are pretty hard. Maybe not super hard, but time consuming to get into. They are proper backcountry kind of places. Whereas you're right, Splake lakes, if you look at them, are not all the time, but often really close to road access, and are pretty darn accessible there. And you're right, like when I've looked at too, it always seems to be like anyone who's ever talking about would be like, well, depending on the season, just treat them like a lake trout or just treat them like a brook trout, and they don't really go in much further than that, which maybe we'll find that that's the case here, but I'm excited to see what nuance you bring to it.
Yeah, I'm certainly going to make those points multiple times, but there'll be some very Splake specific content in there as well. So I mean, I'm pretty pumped to talk about it. So thanks again for having me.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you everybody for taking the time out of your night for coming and listening. That's it really means something to me that you're willing to do that. So
wicked. Well, why don't I get this going then?
Okay, so here we are. We're going to talk about some fly fishing opportunities that don't get talked about too often here in Ontario. I called it hungry hybrids because we're talking about a hybrid species. So you can just flip to the next slide, Chris. So what is a splake? Well, a splake, it is a hybrid species. It's actually taking two different parent species and crossing them. The typical splake that you're going to find here in our Ontario lakes, at least at this point in time, is a mix of a male brook trout and a female lake trout. The name splake comes from, it's mostly up in central and northern Ontario. Brook trout are going to be called speckled trout. We kind of use that term interchangeably for describing the brook trout. I know I grew up calling them specks or speckled trout. It seems like brook trout is now just as common to use that terminology. But the SP from speckled trout gets combined with the lake trout and you get a splake. So it's actually a male brook trout that's crossed with the female lake trout, and I guess the scientific classification or for that type of crossbreeding is an F1 splake. That's typically what we find in our lakes here. So it's a 50% brook trout, 50% lake trout mix. There's some other crossbreeding that's happened in the past, but I'll talk about those just a little bit later on. So yeah, it is a stocked species. It is known as a fertile hybrid, meaning that it has the potential to have some natural reproduction. It's not like a triploid or anything like that. It's been genetically altered so that it can't reproduce. But all of our splake fisheries, at least that I'm aware of here in Ontario, they are non-natural reproducing, although there's evidence to say that it does happen out in the wild, just not enough to create a self-sustaining population as far as we know. So next slide. So when you take male brook trout and you cross it with a female lake trout, you get a fish that looks a lot like both parents. I think that fish that you can see on your screen there is a kind of a perfect example. There's a lot of lake trout characteristics to this female splake, but then also you get a little bit of the coloration of the brook trout mixed in as well. So they're actually a really pretty looking fish. A lot of stocked fish that you might come across when you see stocked rainbow trout, they're kind of not as vibrant in colors as say like these splake can be, which makes it quite a great target when you're looking for a beautiful fish to pursue. Next slide. So how do you know it's a splake? Well, they have some physiological characteristics that would help you identify them. I kind of assume that if you're interested in this presentation, you probably know a little bit about some of the fish species that we have here in Ontario, or at least here in North America. You've probably heard the word char thrown around quite a bit. Brook trout and lake trout, they're both from the char family. So therefore, of course, splake are from the char family as well. And they look like a lot of the different char that you might find in other parts of North America, like Arctic char, bull trout, dolly varden. They're quite a deep-bodied fish. I think that's mainly stemming from their genetics from the brook trout. They could get quite a football shape to them. They have the tricolored fins that are so characteristic of the char species. So there's a photograph at the bottom that's showing like those bright, very vibrant red color fins with the white leading edges. Those are a dead ringer for the char species. You can typically pick those out even if you're looking at your fly in the water, you can start to see those fins coming. You know you have a char following. Characteristic of other char, they have a very light colored background on their flanks, very dark colored background on their flanks with very light colored spots. And that's typical of all the Salvelinus or char species that we have here in North America. When you compare that to, say, a rainbow trout or a brown trout that have a very light background with very dark spots, you can definitely tell that they're not from the same genus as splake, lake trout, brook trout. What's interesting that often happens is somebody might look at a picture of a big trout, a big brook trout, say, and they might say, "Hey, that's a splake." It can be very, very hard to tell. There's actually not a foolproof way of telling while that fish is alive. But some of the things that you can see without actually harming the fish are that most splake don't have those characteristic blue halos that brook trout are famous for. They'll have a lot of spots. They'll even have some red spots, but the blue halos that you're used to seeing on a lot of the brook trout, this splake actually just don't. That gets bred out, I guess, with the cross of the lake trout. They also have a slightly forked tail, so that's a dead giveaway as well. The lake trout are known to have that very, very deep forked tail, whereas brook trout, of course, have a square tail. Splake, much like I'm probably going to repeat a lot throughout this, is they're like the middle ground. They have a slightly forked tail, so not as pronounced as a lake trout, well, not as flat and forked as square as a brook trout's. The average size for a splake, typically that's running between 12 and 18 inches, and that's fish is going to weigh about 1 to 3 pounds. These fish can get quite a lot larger, but that's typically the size that you're going to be seeing if you're fishing some of these smaller back lakes that we have here in Ontario. There is an Ontario record. That fish was over 20 pounds. I don't know a lot about that fish, but when I hear 20 pounds, I'm suspecting that might have been a species, a strain of splake that might have had a lot more lake trout in it than that 50-50 cross, like the F1. But I could be wrong. That's a really, really big one. I wouldn't count on that running into that fish, although you never know. You can definitely find them though. The biggest one that I've personally seen in some of these lakes was about 24 inches, and it was that really thick-bodied male that the Drift used on the cover of advertising for this event. So they can get quite large. They're not a small fish by any means. And as I was saying, it is very difficult to differentiate between lake trout and between splake and lake trout and brook trout. And the really only foolproof way to do so is to actually kill the fish and count the finger-like projectiles, projections in the intestine. I believe they're called pylori, if I got that correct. And splake have a specific number of those. So I don't think we're going to be doing that to any of the fish that we catch. Therefore, we're just kind of relying on the physiological characteristics of that fish to identify it. And that's the same thing even with bull trout and Dolly Varden. They can be really, really difficult to tell the difference. They're actually two completely separate species. It's really only through counting these finger-like projections in the intestines that we can actually positively, with some level of assurance, say that this fish is definitely this species. You can go to the next slide.
I assume, sorry, I was going to say that the lakes that are stocked with these, do they typically have native brook trout and lake trout in them, or are they usually more just splake or?
So most of the lakes that are stocked with splake, they used to have brook trout in them. Whether or not the population has been entirely extirpated, I think is the word. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, if you're catching them, you're not. The ministry, as far as I know, is not stocking over top of native populations. If they're stocking splake in that lake, there's generally a reason, and that's because brook trout have been extirpated from that lake already.
Sure. Yeah. So probably.
Yeah,
be reasonably certain, I guess, based on that. I guess
exactly.
I feel like size at some point you could probably rule out a straight brook trout too. I mean, the world record was 14 pounds of Nipigon, I think. So if you're getting those bigger fish, I assume you could reasonably confidently say that, they're at least a hybrid, if not a lake trout, right?
Yeah, I think if maybe you're fishing like Lake Superior or Lake Nipigon below some of the impassable dams, you might run, because I've heard there's splake in there. I can't confirm.
Well, there's natural, I guess there's potential in those lakes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the United States, most of my presentation is geared towards just Ontario information, and so I haven't looked into how the Americans are managing splake. I have a feeling that they might be stocking splake in potentially even in Superior, right? So you could get strays coming over. That would be the one place that I'd be a little bit, because the brook trout are so large up there that how could you be certain, right? Yeah. I've even heard rumors that, or not rumors, but theories, I guess you could say, of that Lake Nipigon or that Nipigon River world record brook trout, was that actually a pure strain brook trout? Hard to say, right?
At the same time, it cranks out so many 8+ pound fish.
Exactly, right. I know.
I'd be inclined to believe it, but
yeah, I mean, I love the story of that fish so much that I'm just going to say I'm turning a blind eye to any skepticism, and I want that to be so true. So,
cool.
Yeah. So the history of stocking, there's a long history of stocking brook lake trout hybrids, and it goes all the way back to 1871. In Ontario, splake were stocked here for two different reasons. One of them was to create a recreational fishing opportunity. The second reason is to create a deep water salmonid predator that was used to rehabilitate the stocks of lake trout that were decimated in Lake Huron. there was a lot of issues with the Lake Huron lake trout stocks in the 50s and 60s when the sea lamprey really did a number on them. And in order to create a deep water predator that would fill that same ecological niche, they started stocking the lake very, very heavily with Splake.
And so was there something that made them more resilient to those lampreys?
Yeah, I'm going to get into that quite a bit, but I believe what it is that they're able to grow bigger quicker is the biggest thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Then in 1953, the earliest stocking in Ontario took place, and that was 7 lakes in the Sudbury-Nipissing area. In the 50s, we had the stocking of some Algonquin Park lakes, and then in the 57 to 65, that's really when that Lake Huron stocking took over, and they were stocking 500,000 yearlings, and that is a lot of fish. So they were really heavily pumping in Splake into Lake Huron. I know my dad tells stories about going up to Thornbury and some of the Georgian Bay rivers to go fish, not just Great Lakes steelhead at the time, but to go fish the Splake that would actually come into the rivers, which is an interesting thought as we don't have that opportunity anymore. But yeah, they had a lot of Splake in Lake Huron at one point in time.
That's cool. Well, you hear about stories, same thing like Ganaraska lake trout, and the ones that they would get out there too, right? Like,
yeah,
there's a lot of those cool fisheries that aren't around so much anymore. At least, I mean, I know there've been some coast or brook trout captured in Lake Ontario rivers in recent years. Still,
yeah. Did you see Brian Morrison's post on social media? Is that
I've been aware of that post through. I think I've heard Sylvia D'Amelio from Limited talk about it before. Yeah, pretty cool.
yeah. I know. I remember when that one got caught.
Too, right?
There likely is others. I mean, that's really what keeps fishing so fresh is you just never know what you're going to run into out there.
Yeah.
But I don't know, personally, the more fishing opportunities available to us, the better as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah, but you can go to the next slide.
Yeah.
All right, so why do we continue to have Splake fisheries here in Ontario? So the stocking of Splake by the Ministry of Natural Resources, it's kind of moved around a little bit. We no longer have those Lake Huron stockings taking place, as Chris and I were just talking about. But we still do have plenty of stocking taking place of Splake throughout Ontario. They're still stocked in our inland lakes. So most of these lakes are relatively small lakes. I call them back lakes just for lack of a better term. But these are the Canadian Shield lakes that really dot most of central and across to northern Ontario. Not the really far north up past like north of like Cochrane or Timmins. I'm not talking about there. I'm talking kind of the near north, all the way west to the border of Manitoba. And so why are they doing that? Why are they putting so much money into stocking Splake? Well, they provide a recreational fishery in lakes that are no longer suitable to our native chars. So brook trout, if you're not aware, they need very cold, clean water to survive. Lake trout, likewise, they need very cold, clean water to survive. They also are very susceptible to invasive species coming into those lakes. So when we start to bring in species that aren't native to that specific water body. These are things like yellow perch, suckers, and smallmouth bass. They can really do a number on the native char population. Smallmouth bass particularly, as well as yellow perch really, that they are very good at outcompeting brook trout. And so there's a lot of efforts to prevent smallmouth bass from entering our brook trout fisheries. I know the lake that I grew up fishing was once a very, very good brook trout fishery. Smallmouth bass really did a number on them. As long as I fished it, there was smallmouth present, but it was kind of a mix of brook trout and smallmouth. But when I talked to the person who really mentored me in fishing at one point in time, there was very minimal smallmouth bass, and it was primarily a brook trout fishery. And now I don't know, I kind of feel like there's probably not even a single brook trout left. And that's just because they outcompete them for food, as well as the predation that takes place for young brook trout. the reason why Splake are stocked and they're able to still exist in these lakes with invasive species like the ones I just mentioned is that they have a really fast growth rate. So they grow even faster than brook trout do. They become quite pacivorous, so they're able to very quickly reach a point where they start eating minnows, and they can really put the size on a lot quicker in order to evade that predation from species like smallmouth. And you'll actually find Splake in a lot of different lakes that have smallmouth bass in it, and they seem to be doing okay, or at least as if they keep stocking that lake, they seem to be doing okay. They're also a lot more temperature resistant than say a lake trout. Lake trout they need a very specific kind of water body to thrive, and in particular, they need very deep sections of that lake. Splake aren't quite the same as lake trout in the sense that they don't really need that very, very deep water like a lake trout might, and they can still survive in lakes that might not have that 50, 60, 70 feet of water that most lake trout you'll find lake trout in. The other reason why they're stocked is they have a great return to creel ratio. What a return to creel ratio is the amount of angling hours spent trying to catch one of these things against the amount of fish caught. In short, they're easier to catch, which is a good characteristic for those of us that want to be out there having success on the water. And I kind of wish I knew what that ratio was. I haven't actually seen any kind of data to say that how much easier a splake is to catch than say a lake trout or a brook trout, but it's nice to know. And to be honest, from my experience, I have quite a lot of experience trying to catch brook trout and lake trout on the fly in a lot of these back lakes, and it can be really, really hard. The splake just for my experience, they do seem to be more forgiving. And I don't know that I'm just going to throw something totally random out there because it's my own theory. I've never read this anywhere else, or I have no way to really to prove this, but I feel like something happens with hybrids because it's kind of the same that I understand with the tiger trout that happens in like parklands and some of these lakes out in Manitoba, where they have the cross of a brown trout and a brook trout. I feel like if you're crossing fish, they just become angry and highly aggressive. Maybe it's something that's selected for within the hatchery, that the more aggressive the fish is in the hatchery, the more food they get, the more size they put on, therefore they're easier to catch. I'm not sure. But there really does seem to be something that a splake is a little easier to catch than say a native brook trout or a lake trout.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that says something too, because those creel reports where anglers voluntarily report their success rates, you got to always kind of think that they're underreported a little bit too.
If it was me, I'd be underreporting.
Exactly. So if people are underreporting and still showing up, that they're that much easier than.
But I will say that whenever you're asked to do that, like, please fill out that type of information, because like fisheries management decisions get made on that. I just think it's really, really important that we all try to participate in. And if there's a fishery that we want to support and protect, then we got to be taking that step. I fight with it sometimes. I know you might want to keep your secret honey hole to yourself, and please do. I think that's great, but sharing some of that information with the ministry it really will allow the places that need protection to be protected.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point.
All right, so why would you want to fly fish for splake? Why would you even want to try? Well, I think they're an awesome fish. They exhibit both the best qualities of both of their parent species. So they really do get a beautiful color to them. Lake trout can be quite gray. Sometimes you get lake trout that have that nice yellowy color and that some nice edges along their fins. But for the most part, lake trout are usually quite a gray looking fish. Brook trout, on the other hand, are absolutely stunning, and splake take on that brook trout coloration a lot of the time. Splake, as I was just mentioning prior, they're really, really aggressive feeders, making them prime targets for targeting for the fly. They're very well suited to fly fishing methods, especially during some points in the year. They can really be targeted with a fly rod. I've been told many times that you can't catch lake trout and you can't catch splake on the fly, but I think at least now it's 2023. We got all this technology in our fly fishing arsenal now. There's really no game fish that you can say can't be targeted on the fly, as far as I'm aware. They're really beautiful. They also taste really good. We don't often talk about eating fish, at least on a lot of these live streams where catch and release is, of course, promoted. But we are talking about a stocked fishery here. These lakes are stocked as a put and take fishery. So whenever I'm going out there to target splake, it's usually on a canoe trip. It's usually with friends. There's really no better way to end the day than to sit around and maybe keep one or two fish to have that shore lunch. And certainly much better than, say, keeping a lake trout that has a much slower growth rate and is a much older fish and perhaps a lake couldn't support. So if you're going to want to have that trout on the campfire, which is a lovely experience and highly promote in sustainable ways, really keeping a splake is probably the best way that you could do it. They also live in really, really nice lakes. So when I'm talking about a stocked fishery, I'm not talking about going down to a pond and, an urbanized environment. These lakes are beautiful Canadian Shield lakes. Some of them are a few portages away from a main body of water. And it really feels like you're out there having a kind of your wilderness experience. Meanwhile, you don't have to travel quite as far as you would to try to find brook trout fishing of the similar caliber. So next slide. All right, so I want to talk a bit about how you're going to find a place to go splake fishing, because it's not that easy. I know I've looked all over the internet for some guidance, and to be honest with you, there's not a lot out there. One of the best things just to start somewhere is to look at the 2023 Fishing Ontario regulations. There's a beautiful cover of a brown trout on there that Matt Martin took. And so get your copy of the most recent edition and have a look in there. What you're going to notice is that a lot of the areas that have, or a lot of the zones that have splake fishing opportunities, they're actually open all year round. So that's something that really is worth taking note of, is that there's a very long season that you can target these fish in. Perfect. So you're flipping back and forth there. That's okay. We'll move on to this. This tool here is what I consider to be the most valuable resource if you're looking to try to find a place to go splake fishing. And that's the M&R Fish Online tool. I apologize if you are very familiar with this already. Just in case there's some people out there who haven't been using this, this is it feels like a relatively recent resource available to the public that can be accessed online. It's using GIS technology, and you can look at any lake you want throughout the province and pull up what type of fish live in that lake, as well as even some stocking data on that lake. So what I suggest you do, if you have absolutely no idea where you might want to start to look in areas that are probably from about Algonquin Park north. That's where the Splake stocking would take place. Look in the areas along Algonquin Park's borders, Haliburton Highlands, Temagami, up towards Temiskaming, and then even across towards the North Shore Superior, Lake Superior Provincial Park, and just sort of follow those lakes all through there. And if you start looking for fish species, you're going to notice that a lot of the lakes that aren't too far away from a big lake or a lake, or even the road of a small to medium-sized lake, a lot of those lakes get splake stocked into them. So that gives you a good starting point. I spent a lot of time on this tool, and it's something that I wish I had earlier in my life.
And again, like some of that is sort of angler reported. I've seen some lakes that I know are just little ponds with bass in them kind of near me that supposedly also have rainbow trout based on those angler reports. But the great thing about splake is that, like I say, they're all stocked. So you know that if it says that they're a splake, it'll be listed as a government supported claim, and you can trust it, right? And stocking tab there.
That's funny you say that, because I've had the opposite experience where I've checked some of the lakes that I fish on here that say like there's pumpkin seed and perch. Meanwhile, I know there's trout in those lakes because I've caught them. So yeah, nothing's perfect. There's no perfect tool out there by any means. I really highly promote that everybody use this this tool though, at least just for, even if we're not talking about splake or trout fishing and you're talking about bass or anything, like it's very useful for scoping out what you might find in some of the different lakes. But as we were saying, nothing is entirely 100% trustworthy. So nothing beats boots on the ground and going and looking yourself.
Right on.
So once you have your area in mind, you can also look for provincial stocking data. As we just keep mentioning, this is all the stocking programs. It's all done through the Ministry of Natural Resources. So this is not information that really should be much of a secret. I got up here some of the information I found about Splake stocking in the Haliburton Highlands in Zone 15. And as you can see, talks about the lake name, the township that it's in. It even gives you GPS coordinates as to where you might find this lake, as well as the numbers of splake that are stocked in on an annual basis. One point I'll mention is that you'll notice on, I can't really see it because I have something up on my screen, but you will notice that some of the lakes are showing totally different numbers of splake that are stocked in those lakes. Some of them are very high. Some of them are very, moderate to low. I wouldn't let that discourage you. What I've noticed in some of the lakes that I know I've fished is that some of the bigger fish and some of the better fishing is lakes that don't necessarily have the huge amount of fish that are being stocked in them. So I know my first instinct when I looked at that was like, I want to go to the lake that has 5,000 stocked in it every year. What we ended up finding was lots and lots of 10 inchers. Tried some other lakes that were somewhere in the middle of the ballpark, and we had far better fishing in those lakes. So that would just be my one thing that I learned, is that more fish doesn't necessarily mean better fishing.
Yep, I can see that resulting in maybe a little less pressure on them too.
That's probably it. I'm not sure how they decide how much fish to put in each body of water. I would think size of the lake would have a lot to do with it, as well as maybe, I don't know if they have the data about like how much food is available to the fish, and maybe they're trying to, not throw the ecosystem out of whack. I would hope that would be a consideration, but yeah, I really don't know. I'd love to hear if there's a biologist watching that knows this information. I'd love to hear from you. But for the record, I'm not a biologist. I am just somebody who enjoys fishing these places.
Awesome. Yeah, you look at this and like, yeah, Big East Lake has the 5,000 fish in there. I mean, that is a big lake. So
there you go.
Lots of fish, but lots of water to cover too.
So Backroads map books. I don't know if anybody's ever had experience using these before. What I'll say about them, I mean, I'm not endorsed by them or anything like that. I own a bunch of them. They're fun to look through. The maps are really detailed, and they're actually a really beautiful map that they have. What I like these for, though, is that you can generally find places to launch your canoe or launch your boat. So there's a lot of information about that. There is some stocking data that they normally put in these books. There's a little bit of fish species data. Take it with a grain of salt. I don't know if you're going to find the best fishing spot in the world by following it, because generally if it says that there's amazing fishing here, then other people are going to know that there's great fishing there as well. But what I like about this is that it just shows you different accesses. Then you're not going to drive down a road and get into trouble because you're trespassing on someone's private property or anything like that. So that type of information can be quite useful to grab from these types of resources.
Okay.
Yeah, next slide. So crown land camping, that's another thing that's really worth considering when you're trying to plan a trip to go fish for some splake. 77% of Ontario, it's actually crown land, which means that is free camping opportunities available to all of us who are residents here. So any Ontario resident can actually camp on crown land for 21 consecutive days per year. So that's a lot of time that you can spend fishing and not having to pay park fees or worry about some of the other maybe legalities associated with camping in provincial parks. There is an online tool. I haven't used it too much, to be honest, but it looks like it'll be very useful for finding crown land campsites. Have you camped on crown land before, Chris?
Trying to think. I've certainly used ground land just for travel. Camping wise, I think it's been more limited to parks for myself, but it is a good tool. I have used the Ground Land Atlas, and it's kind of similar to Fish Online, pretty easy to navigate. And the data is coming straight from the source in the government. So I love it. I think it's a great resource. Sure.
Yeah, and it really is something that gets overlooked. I mean, what are we in here? We're almost in February. which means that very soon we're going to reach that point where really, really busy parks are going to start to get reserved in advance. And especially with things like COVID, really increasing the amount of campers and people looking to go enjoy the outdoors. A lot of provincial parks fill up in the middle of winter for booking reservations. So we have amazing provincial parks. I don't want to discourage anybody from planning a trip to our awesome parks, but we also have all this crown land that just doesn't really get used in the same way. And it takes a little bit more to figure out, but it's definitely worth pursuing. And what you will find as well, if you're on that fish online tool and you're looking for lakes to go splake fishing on, a lot of the splake lakes have campsites that are crown land campsites on them. So have a look at those. Algonquin Provincial Park is obviously a provincial park, so it's a little bit different as far as rules. Even fishing seasons are a little bit different because you can't camp in Algonquin Park. I believe it's past November 30th, but they actually publish some of the stocking data for Algonquin Park. So they have a number of lakes that are stocked with splake. Most of those lakes tend to fall along that Highway 60 corridor. That's the highway that runs through the heart of the park. A lot of those lakes, they do get fished quite heavily, but if you're looking for a place to start, I mean, everybody loves Algonquin Park. You can't not have a great time there. So you can look at those lakes, but just know that those campsites that are on those types of lakes, they get booked up really fast. There may be subject to availability, and if there's fishing pressure on splake lakes, it's generally going to be concentrated to Algonquin Park.
Sure. Interesting opportunity with Algonquin as well is that, of course, I believe you can fish until end of November in the park, but of course, lake trout and brook trout are closed after September 30th.
Correct.
Whereas splake, you can fish and they go into that kind of, pre-spawn or false spawn, whatever it is, and get all that awesome coloration and get really aggressive and stuff, right?
Yeah, and that's really where most of my splake fishing actually has been done typically in the fall, in Algonquin and outside of Algonquin.
I guess
just because of exactly what you're saying. It's past September 30th, trout season's closed up, but you still have this other opportunity that's available October, November, end of November. Algonquin's out, but I've heard of people even going in December. And actually, this December, I think it was this December that was pretty warm in the early part of the year. I was thinking of it myself.
Yeah, all fishing in Algonquin, I believe, closes December 1st.
Correct.
No ice fishing in the park or anything. So even though Splake would be open in zone 15, not in the park.
Correct.
Tons of options like you pointed out past that.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you watch Jeff Jackson's presentation on Algonquin Park, Jeff's maps came up. These are an awesome resource. I have a bunch of them. There's even Jeff's maps that were made for Temagami as well. And the best thing about Jeff's maps, from a fisherman's point of view anyway, is that they marked the different fish species that were in some of the lakes. So on that photograph on the right-hand side, there's a little fish marked on that lake, and a red fish indicated that was actually a splake lake. Excuse me. Which that was very helpful for trip planning and just knowing what was in the lakes. And I had these even before Fish Online was a thing. And of course, when you're camping and you don't have any cell phone service, Fish Online isn't going to help you all that much. So these are a great resource. Unfortunately, you're no longer able to order these maps through the Jeff's Maps website. But I do believe that Jeff, the individual who ran the company, I think, and made these maps, that he's now working for another company called Unlostify, and they're producing maps that are of a similar nature. So I'm not entirely sure if there's going to be like fish species identified on those maps, but I was on their website just before this presentation, and if you can get your hand on a set of Jeff's maps now, I would certainly urge you to do so, because they were really a great resource for trip planning if you're specific to Algonquin, Temagami, or the Killarney area. Even he had maps for. Okay. So the life history of a splake, at least as far as a very quick life history of them, they are a cold water fish. They're a char. They like temperatures that are between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 to 16 degrees Celsius. Typically in the spring, they're quite shallow. And then as summer rolls around, they start to transition to deeper water. They're going to move down to an area of the lake called the thermocline, which I'll just touch on a little bit more later in the presentation. But when they're a young fish, They're typically feeding on insects, crustaceans, even things like plankton and things like that in the water. But very quickly, they're going to switch to a piscivorous diet. And so what that means is they're going to start eating other fish. And that allows them to put on size very quickly and evade some of the invasive species like smallmouth bass and yellow perch that might be looking to eat them. They mature at around 3 years old, and they can live up to about 20 years old. So if you think about a lake trout, I think the average for a lake trout is, if they're healthy and there's nobody, they don't run into any problems, they can live to about 40, 50 years old, I believe is right around the ballpark that a lake trout can live. Whereas brook trout, they don't live nearly as long. Brook trout, 8 years, I think, is kind of where they max out on. Chris, you might know more than I do. So what I'm getting at here is that a splake is really middle of the road again. They can live up to 20 years old. So that would allow them to put some size on if they're able to survive to that type of age. As far as spawning is concerned, now they are a fertile hybrid. So technically speaking, or in theory, they could spawn. They don't actually have a lot of success spawning, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to go through that same physiological change that other char species are going to have. So you're going to really run into them in the fall. They're going to have bright orange bellies. They're going to have, at least the males will, they're going to get that type of a hook jaw. They're going to move to areas of the lake that in preparation for a spawn. So even though they're not naturally reproducing in these lakes, they still sort of do the dance and pretend that they don't know any better. They don't know any different. Interesting to note is that the only place that natural reproduction has been documented is actually Algonquin Park. So there's a series of lakes in Algonquin that it has been observed that natural reproduction has occurred out in the wild. That's not really of interest to fishermen because it's not really going to change the population levels. It's not a self-sustaining population or anything. It's just that it was observed and documented that it is a possibility to happen. But I thought that was interesting that it was so close to home for us, right?
Yeah, very cool.
Okay, and so what kind of lakes are we fishing? In case you've never heard these terms before, I'll just go run over them really, really fast. You have eutrophic lakes. Eutrophic lakes are the type of lake that's really, really rich in nutrients, has a lot of organic matter, very, very high in biological activity. That's usually lots of food, lots of insects. They're shallow, they're muddy, there's lots of plant life. That is not somewhere that you're going to find our char species. The type of fish you're going to find there is habitat conducive to, say, a largemouth bass. Now, on the flip side, you have I can never say this word, oligotrophic lake. How did I do, Chris?
Good enough for me.
Okay.
Yeah. Matt nailed it last week, and I only ever read it. I don't think I've ever even.
Should have practiced. I should have practiced. Yeah. Oligotrophic lakes are completely the opposite of eutrophic lakes. So these are our lakes that we're going to be finding our char species here in Ontario. They're very, very low in nutrients and organics. They're typically quite clear. They have a lower biological activity, so there's not a lot of food sources available to the fish, and they typically have very rocky and very sandy bottoms. So these are the lakes that you're going to find in a lot of our Canadian Shield environment, up towards the Haliburton Highlands, where a lot of these Splake lakes are, up in Algonquin Park, and then even going towards Temiskaming. These are the types of lakes that we have, and it's very, very hard for these fish to live. It's not an easy environment, and so a fish to survive there has to be very, very good at maximizing and taking advantage of its ecological niche that's available to it there, and that's really why Splake are able to survive there. A mesotrophic lake, that's just the middle ground. Those are your lakes that you're probably used to fishing and seeing in cottage country. So that would be where you'd find, smallmouth bass, northern pike, your walleye lakes, a little bit of weeds, not as quite as deep as the oligotrophic lakes. So next slide. So for a fish that can survive in a oligotrophic lake, they need to be very, very flexible in what they will eat and because they have to eat what's available to them. So adult Splake are very, very piscivorous. They like to eat other fish. That is their preferred food source. Yellow perch is a really key forage for splake. And the reason why is because in a lot of these lakes where yellow perch have entered, they've actually made the brook trout go extinct in those lakes. So once yellow perch comes in, those yellow perch are eating all the baby brook trout and really pushing the brook trout populations down. Well, when splake gets stocked in those lakes, they're able to actually kind of turn the tables and really feed heavily on these yellow perch. So yellow perch is a very, very important forage source for these fish. In a lot of these lakes, they also have fall fish. Fall fish love to grab our flies too, if you've never seen one. I believe they're a member of the minnow species, and they're a chub, basically, is what they are. So they got really big scales on them. They have kind of a sort of a downturned mouth a little bit, and they can actually get to kind of a decent size. They can get to, 12 inches or so.
And that photo does not do them justice, because they are cool.
No, they're actually kind of a cool
enjoyed that
fish.
fall fish.
Yeah. Have you caught some?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Big.
they can get quite big, and they're
Massive.
pretty thick body fish too. Yeah, then I mean, usually I'm a little disappointed because I usually think I have a brook trout when I have one on the end, but by all means, they're still a native fish, and they're really, really cool. And if you catch them in the spring, they're actually quite a pink color. They don this rosy pink, kind of beautiful coloration to them. And the splaker will definitely be feeding on fall fish if they're found in the exact same environment. The good thing about both yellow perch and fall fish is if you're fishing smaller flies, you're probably going to catch the forage. And so you at least know that, hey, you know what, this is probably what the game fish I'm after are targeting. Other types of forage that Splake will focus on is especially in the deeper lakes, and especially at certain times of year when they're retreating down to the thermocline and they're in those deeper water environments, is they're going to be looking for those very silvery type of bait fish. Cisco is our native bait fish, which is the lake herring, and that's the primary food source for a lot of the lake trout. Splake will also be targeting those if those are found in the lake that they're in. And then, of course, rainbow smelt are another very common food source for them. Rainbow smelt being extremely invasive. They shouldn't be in a lot of our lakes, but they are, and Splake will target those if that's found in the lake that they're in. That said, Splake are very, very, very good at maximizing or just taking advantage of whatever food source is available to them in a lake. So some of the other things that they're definitely eating are leeches. I know a lot of different lakes that I fish have a huge leech population, and some of these bloodsuckers get enormous. And I have not a doubt in my mind that these splake are eating these leeches. Sculpins are a very popular food source in a lot of these lakes, and maybe surprisingly, crayfish as well. A lot of these lakes have lots of crayfish, and splake love to eat a crayfish or two if given a chance. And then the other thing that they'll do is similar to a lot of other trout and char species, is they'll actually cannibalize their own. So if given the chance, you don't want to be a small splake next to a big splake because you're probably going to get eaten.
That's cool. And I'm thinking, like, in terms of lake trout, I know gotten with friends fish a lot sort of far north. So talking like territories, Saskatchewan, stuff like that. Like, they talk about having different strains of lake trout where some are, really into larger bait fish and stuff, and others they call them red lake trout or something along those lines, but they're really into bugs still. Do you find, I know you say that these fish bulk up quick because they end up being more focused on bait fish and things like that, but have you found larger fish to ever be much into bugs?
No.
Cool.
Not larger fish. And as I mentioned previously, I have been known to keep the odd fish on some of these trips. I have not seen evidence that they are eating the invertebrate life. What you're touching on there is actually something that I'm not the correct person to speak to on it, but I am actually really fascinated in, I guess it's the ecology of what you're talking about, how lake trout, certain lake trout, I don't know how to really use the correct terminology, but certain lake trout in a given body of water, there's almost subspecies of those lake trout, even within that water body. There's a lake in Algonquin Park that's known to be just completely full of lake trout, but no lake trout really get above 3 pounds. And they're some of the most beautiful lake trout you've ever seen. The flesh on these lake trout is like a brook trout's because they're eating bugs, right? That's pretty much what they're doing most of the time. But then every now and then, somebody catches just this absolute ginormous lake trout out of this lake because that lake trout is now eating all those 3-pounders, right?
Yeah.
And so there's something about the Salvelinus species that can really allow it to just find different niches. I know even in Iceland, you'll actually get Arctic char, and it's the same phenomenon. You're getting Arctic char that are eating plankton, and they never get very big. They only get a couple inches long. Whereas then you'll get other Arctic char, and they're eating invertebrates and shrimp and things like that, and they get a little bit bigger. But then every now and then one comes along, and that fish is eating all the other baby char, and that gets to a very, very massive size. So that seems to be something in the population dynamics of those fish. As far as Splake is concerned, I haven't seen small to medium sized fish that I'm certain are eating bugs, though. I don't know if that's maybe because they are still a stocked fish. I don't know.
Do you think it comes back to the lakes that they're in as well? Because I mean, those, now it's my chance to muck up that word, but oligotrophic lakes, yeah, like you say, they tend to be not sterile, but they're less fertile and have less bug life. If you found, you know, a lake with maybe areas that were able to house more bug life and still present the right temperatures, do you think that at that point maybe you'd see a different?
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because you're creating new niches, and I think
our brook trout lakes, frankly, for the most part, suck for bug life, right?
they do. They do.
People don't fish a lot of bugs up on the brook trout lakes.
No, you fish leeches.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm wondering, maybe
Yeah.
get different. I mean, I don't even know if those lakes exist. Like if we've stocked fish in lakes like that around here, but
Yeah, to be honest,
yeah.
I don't know, but I love these questions, and I definitely have very similar questions to that, and I don't know if we'd be able to find that answer, but it's just one of the things that just amazes you about nature, though, right? Is that, like, I don't know, you think you know something, and along comes a huge piscivorous splake that we didn't know was in there eating all the other ones. Yeah. So I'm gonna just get into a little bit about, if I piqued your interest in this fish and in this species, when should you go fishing for them? Well, we're just gonna start with spring. I consider spring to really be April to early June. Now, when I was growing up and kind of trying to learn a little bit about how to fish these types of lakes, the old adage was you had to be there at ice out. Everybody would tell you, like, if you're there a week after ice out, you're too late. You missed the fishing. It's almost as if like the fish just stopped eating or something. They only ate for 1 week out of the year, and it was that week after ice out. So a lot of anxiety would go into trying to plan when that ice was off that lake in order to be there at that time. And that was always the traditional time of year that you'd be doing this trip planning. Now, ice out is a great time to go. There's nothing wrong with going at ice out. I think a lot of people plan trips around some of the backcountry char fishing, including Splake, around ice out. And the primary reason for that is that the temperatures are very consistent across the lake. So the bottom temperature and the top temperature of the lake is roughly the same. And then what is happening there is that the food sources are all going to be attracted to the areas of the lake that are warming up. So you're going to get that sunlight hitting the surface of the water. That's going to set off reactions of photosynthesis, which is then going to bring smaller fish, little baby fish. It's going to bring larger fish to eat those fish. And then, of course, you're going to have the predatory fish falling behind. And it's comfortable for them. Splake are a very cold water fish, and so they're more than happy to be in that really cold water, and they're living their best life right after ice out. Yeah, you're really going to be looking for them very shallow areas. At this time of year, my recommendation is to be fishing Splake like you would fish brook trout. So my technique for fishing brook trout is always to start really shallow and to start banging around any kind of boulders or rocks that you can find along the shoreline. That's exactly where the Splake are going to be. Less than 5 feet is not too shallow. These fish, they're going to be in there tight. They're going to be looking for those yellow perch and those bait fish that are going to be hugging close to that warmer shoreline water. Looking for areas that have ambush points, like any kind of rocky point or shoal, is really, really where you want to be focusing most of your efforts. That said, if you can find some large sandy flats in a lake, those are going to warm up really quickly. It's going to attract some of those fish over, some of the bait fish with the warmer water, and of course, right behind them is going to be Splake. The other thing that I wanted to make sure that I mention is if you can notice in the springtime, especially if you notice a little bit of weed growth. Now, when we're talking about these types of lakes that you said it better than I did, oleotrophic lakes, we're not getting huge cabbage beds of weeds like you would see in other types of lakes. But what I'm talking about when I say weeds are just the smallest bit of plant life growing. Usually you're going to get some lily pads growing up a little bit. They might not be on the surface of the water. They might be down below the water. And maybe you can see just those early signs of some plant life growing. Well, that's just going to be like a dead ringer for attracting food. Those are great brook trout spots if you're fishing brook trout in the spring, but they're also great splake spots. So if you are lucky enough to find those little patches growing, don't ignore those. Fish those very thoroughly because you're likely to see some of the predatory fish relating to that structure nearby. Regardless of any types of structure I'm talking about, it's still going to be relatively close to deep water. I have spent so much time fishing very, very shallow, muddy bays to no avail, just because we didn't necessarily know the depth that we were fishing at. We didn't have sonars or anything like that. These are typically very minimalist fishing excursions where we have a canoe, maybe even a map that shows depth for that lake if you can get your hands on one. It's very useful. But don't waste your time in super shallow, muddy bays, or even shallow, really rocky bays. I find that targeting areas that are at least somewhat close to deep water. When I say deep, I'm not talking about 100 feet of water. I'm talking about 40, 50 feet of water is definitely enough to call deep in these types of lakes. Most of them aren't very big. These are pretty small lakes. So if you have areas that have some steep drop-offs to it, definitely be looking in those shallower areas that aren't too far away from those steeper drop-offs, because that's where they're going to go when the weather warms up a little bit. So you can hit the next one. Now the summertime. So what are they doing in the summertime? Well, these fish, they don't really love it when the water starts to become quite warm, and they start to move deeper and deeper and deeper as those temperatures climb. So summer to me is typically June to September. Now, June can have good fishing in it. I don't want to discourage anybody from making a trip to some of these Splake lakes in June. One of the things that I need to mention is that the black flies are atrocious. You have to be a real glutton for punishment and be really, really hardcore and wanting to find some fish sometimes when the black flies are out. I've done it, and I've had some really great fishing in early and mid-June. I've had the entire place to myself because nobody else is crazy enough, I think, to be sacrificing all their blood to fish there. And this is really even applies to lake trout fishing. I had great lake trout fishing even in June. So on a lot of these Canadian Shield lakes, a lot of people might tell you after ice out, the fish start moving deeper. That's not entirely true. These fish will come up and feed in some of the shallow waters at that time of year, where they're very easily targeted in some of the low light times of the day. But of course, like as like July and August hit, these fish, they're gonna drop down. They're gonna move deeper where they're more comfortable. Splake at this time of year, they kind of become more like lake trout. So what are they doing? They're now going to be searching out that thermocline. And if you've never heard of a thermocline, what that is at the very surface of the water, or that mixed drink that you're looking at on your screen, is you have the warmer water mixing with cooler water. So that's kind of your surface layer. But then you have this layer of water beneath the surface that really the temperature starts to decrease really rapidly through that layer. That's known as the thermocline. And so it's something like for every 10 feet down, it's dropping 10 degrees. So really, really becoming quite cold. That's where your lake trout are going to sit for most of the summertime if that lake holds lake trout. Well, Splake are kind of like lake trout at this time of year, and they're going to be down there. They still like water a little bit warmer than lake trout, so they're usually just above the thermocline. From what I've actually read in a lot of like peer-reviewed research, is that's where their thermal refuge will be. So they'll be hanging out there just to kind of survive through the summer, and that's actually where a lot of the oxygen and the bait fish are too, so they can survive there pretty comfortably. Brook trout, on the other hand, they don't go quite as deep as either of the species, and they'll stay just above that thermocline level. And I used to think the thermocline was way down deep in the bottom of the lake or something, but that's not actually true at all. Thermocline in a lot of these lakes can be found about 25 feet or so, 30 feet down. It's not unreachable, even with your a lot of the sinking lines that we have available to us now. It's a very difficult time for somebody that's fly fishing or even somebody that's fishing conventional gear to target these fish. It seems just like their activity level just isn't as high. I have tried, mind you, I've tried unsuccessfully. But so I don't normally take trips to fish for char in the summertime. There's just so many other species available to us here in Ontario and so many other things to do that's just not typically the time that I do, but it's difficult, but it's not impossible. I do know some anglers that love to, I guess they like the challenge, and they do quite well fishing sinking lines through the summertime for these, for char like Splake all throughout the summer. The other thing to note is that even during the low light periods of the morning and the evening, these fish got to eat. It doesn't matter that it's a hot temperature; they're still going to be moving up into these areas, like the very shallow shoals and the points, because they got to feed. So they're going to come up and feed, typically early morning, late evening, before going back down to that thermal refuge later on in the middle of the day. So when it gets too hot.
Yeah.
Go to the next one. Have you done any of that, Chris? Fished
Unsuccessfully.
unsuccessfully? Yeah, it's not easy, but I do know a couple
I
people
agree,
that
June
have done very
is-
well.
Yeah, I mean, talking about like my experience with rainbow trout, brook trout, like June, absolutely.
Yeah.
Depending on the year you have, I don't mind it at all.
Yeah, June's good. It's just the bugs. That's the hard part, right? If you get a little bit of a breeze, and one of the things about black flies that nobody really talks about too much is it's unpredictable, right? So every day is not the same. Some days are really, really bad where you want to run away and just get out of there. But then other days you barely know that they're there. So it's usually not that they're terrible the whole time. It kind of depends on, I guess, the weather conditions. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't discourage somebody from going in June, but the one thing I would say is if you go, bring a bug net. It's gonna just make your life so much easier. So now we're into fall. Fall is my personal favorite time to fish for these. And really, what do I consider to be fall? Well, that's the end of September to November. By the end of September, our cool nights, they've dropped that temperature right down on the surface of the lake. It's typically getting to be about, I don't know, maybe like 60 degrees. So not quite at that temperature that it's like to hang out at most of the time. But these fish are going to be pretty shallow already at the very end of September, well within our comfort zone for fly angling. As that month moves on into October, well, those fish are going to be right in that shallow water again. They're going to start to exhibit that spawning behavior and those physiological changes that we were talking about. They get really aggressive. I think the males especially get aggressive, and especially if you start throwing flies that are bright orange or bright colors, it just kind of makes them quite angry, and you're going to get those territorial responses. So even though they might not be actually feeding, you're going to have a lot of activity going on with these fish. In the fall, what I have found to be true anytime I have fished them is that the fish are very concentrated. So even though in the spring you might have caught one fish over here on this point, you might have caught one fish over here at this mouth of this bay, you might have caught this fish over here on this rock. In the fall, those fish are going to be very densely concentrated. So it can seem like a lake has no fish in it. Meanwhile, once you find them, you are going to have a very fun time. And mark that spot, keep that spot for future use, because that's where they're going to be most of the time, is in that kind of concentrated area. And they are in schools. For the most part, Splake, I can't believe I skipped over it already, but for the most part, Splake are a schooling fish. They usually are with other Splake. They're not like a solo fish, like you might get a solo lake trout cruising around. They like to be around other Splake, at least in smaller groups throughout most of the year. It's just in that fall when they start to prepare for the spawning behavior, of course, they're going to just group up. As that water temperature drops, so as you're starting to get into end of October, those fish are still extremely active. You can catch them in water temperature, high 40s, even down to mid 40s, very, very active still, even at that temperature range. Again, they're related to Arctic char, bull trout that are used to that very, very cold water. So even if you're getting snow falling, it can still be very good fishing. One of the best days I had was an October day when the snow was coming down hard, and it was just totally surreal setting. I think a moose had swam by earlier that day, and yeah, we were into the Splake pretty good. So just because it's getting cold doesn't mean that the fishing is going to be slow. Some of the areas that I'd look for are some of the smaller bays. If you know that there's groundwater coming in, or there's a little bit of current, even just like a trickle of a spring coming in, or you've seen springs in that general area, I would target those, because that's that brook trout mentality that's coming out in the fish, and they're going to congregate around those as they start to do their spawning. Also looking over at shoals and points, these are other areas that I've found large concentrations of fish in the fall, and usually, again, quite shallow, not more than 10 feet deep. Usually 10 feet is kind of a sweet spot, but love fishing between 5 to 10 feet deep at that time of year.
Cool.
The next one. When to fish for Splake in the winter. So I'm the wrong person to ask for this, because I'm not much of an ice fisherman, but ice fishing is still a very popular time of year to fish for this species. And I felt I had to add at least just one slide where I'm actually not even holding a Splake, I'm holding a lake trout, as you can tell by that deep fork tail. But anyway, ice fishing, because that season is open all year round. Splake are very popular ice fishing game fish. The same techniques that you're going to use for brook trout and lake trout, that can be used for Splake. You can find them in the shallows, just like you would brook trout, but then of course you might find them in the deeper water like you would a lake trout. There's a lot of information out there about ice fishing for Splake. A lot of information about fishing for Splake is only about ice fishing for some reason. So if you do have an interest in ice fishing for them, please consult those resources. I'm not going to talk about that here. We're talking about fly fishing for them. So let's go to that next slide. And I really want to dive into what I use to target them, because I just think that's kind of the most fun stuff to talk about. Chris, do you have the time there? I don't have it on my.
Oh, we're good. 9:13.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, no, we're doing fine for time. So fly fishing for Splake, I mean, the gear is kind of the fun stuff to talk about. At least that's what I like talking about. The type of rods that I'm going to bring out with me most of the time are going to be moderate fast action rods. These are in a 6 or 7 weight. These fish aren't enormous. Most of the ones you're catching, they're probably going to be around 16 to 20 inches. So that 6 to 7 weight range is perfect. 9 to 10 foot length, it's going to be kind of personal preference. The rod that I fish most often is a 9'6" 6 weight. That's kind of my still water trout rod. The reason why is I like casting the rod. And then the other reason why is all my sinking lines are in 6 weights. So that's typically why I will choose that. But if you're fishing out of like a canoe or a belly boat, like a float tube, having that 10-foot length is very useful. You can really get that line up above your head. It's really just personal preference there. But if you only have a 9'6" weight, or you only have a 9'5" weight even, I wouldn't think that you're going to be too outgunned. One thing I'll say though, and I haven't done this, is that I've noticed a lot of people who fish Splake out in Utah and Colorado and some of their alpine lakes, they're throwing huge flies for these fish. Really, really big flies, because as I was saying, they're very aggressive fish. I think if you had a 8 weight, that would be needed for throwing that really big fly. I like to throw bigger flies for them, but nothing that a 7 weight can't handle. So for me, a big fly for a Splake is about 5 inches long. The reels are probably the least important piece of gear, as it is with most trout fishing. It's really just something that looks nice and something for you to stick in your photos and take pictures of. Cassette reels, though, are very popular with still water anglers. And if you don't know what a cassette reel is, that's a reel that, I'm going to use the terminology all wrong, but it has a cassette, or a little plastic piece that actually slides on and off the reel casing itself. And that just allows you to, they're cheaper than buying a separate spool, and allows you to carry all kinds of sinking lines and different sink rates on your lines to interchange them. I'm sure you guys sell them at the shop, Chris.
You know what? It's actually kind of tricky to find a great cassette reel in North America these days, because there's kind of a weak following, I think, among stillwater anglers. Even looking at, some of the BC anglers, like I find a lot of them don't carry a lot of lines. Like myself, I carry about 15 lines or so for
Wow.
my still water stuff. Hammock makes a decent cost effective one. That stock as a regular item, but really bring one in for somebody.
Nice.
But otherwise, yeah, just an inexpensive reel that you can get an expensive spools for is always a decent thing too.
Yeah, so if you're going to get into the Stillwater game, it might be something you want to consider. I was considering buying a cassette style reel at one point in time, but then I don't know what happened. I just spent all my money on just new reels, so I have a million new reels. Not a million. I don't know. I think I carry about like I'm not as bad as you with 15 lines, Chris. I usually have about 3 or 4 different reels that balance out a 6 or 7 weight with me, and that gets the job done just fine. So there's lots of cheap reels out there. I know, like I think you guys carry the some of the Reddington reels are pretty good quality and pretty
Or even
inexpensive.
records, like you could get, a 60 some odd dollar reel and
There you go.
spools at 20-30 bucks wherever they are.
Yeah, and it just beats an extra step in trying to put something like a cassette or a different spool on, right?
Yeah.
Just pop the reel on, pop the reel
Yeah,
off.
and,
It's very
to your
helpful.
point, I mean, I'm interested to hear your take on your thoughts on hitting depths with Splake. So most of my Stillwater stuff is done with rainbow trout, which can be super picky on depth, which is why
Yep.
I have a stupid number of lines. Could probably do with less, but my guess, not knowing too much about this, is you probably do with a lot less.
So my approach in most of fly fishing is to just make do with what you got. And definitely a lot of these trips are they're backcountry trips. So we're traveling quite light, and I don't want to bring a lot of gear. I'm not going to bring 15 lines with me. That said, I typically won't even bring a floating line if I'm going to be doing some of this type of fishing. And if I'm targeting Splake specifically, and I'm not targeting brook trout, where I think, what if there's a dry fly hatch? Like, what if the magic happens and we get brook trout eating mayflies on the surface? So if I'm actually targeting Splake, I'm going to be probably set up with an intermediate line to start. That the intermediate line sinks very slowly, allows me to fish about 2 to 3 feet down. I like a really fast presentation for at least starting out for Splake, and so that's really what I'm going to go for most of the time. I do always bring a Type 3 just to drop that down a little bit more, and then of course I have that Type 5 as well, which is a 5 inch per second drop. Very useful to have that Type 5 line. I do have a Type 7. I do use it. I like a really heavy sinking line when I just have tried everything else and I haven't been able to find the fish yet. The other thing is if I'm going to troll a fly, which is a little bit controversial, I like a heavy sink tip just because I want to really dredge up that bottom and just try to find where these fish might be. But most of the time, I like an intermediate. A lot of the fish I've caught, a lot of the fish you're seeing in these pictures, they were caught using an intermediate line. The first time I ever made an honest attempt, I left the spinning rod at home and I was like, I'm doing this, I'm figuring this out on the fly. I came in with that rainbow trout Stillwater mindset of trying different lines, trying different retrieves, trying the line twist retrieve. I had some indicators with me. I was going to try a little bit of float and fly method. I didn't try boobies. I wish I did. I want to tune into that presentation you guys are going to do on boobies because I think that might be a great way to fish these fish. But I really didn't have any success. Little leech patterns and stuff, couldn't buy a fish. Once I went to that intermediate line, big fly, fish really aggressively, like you'd be trying to trigger a smallmouth bass to eat. That's my method. That's what I find the most success in. So I don't know if that's just me and that's what works for me, but an intermediate line and a Type 5 line, if you only had 2 to pick from, that's what I would take. So grab those 2 and head out there and try it. As far as leader, again, we're getting really simple here. Most of these presentations are really active presentations, so really stiff butt section, and then really just terminating in like a piece of 1x or 2x. Typically a leader would be about, I don't know, maybe 6 feet long, not even very long. And that just really, that stouter leader is because they hit really hard and oftentimes they hit right beside the canoe or the boat. So when I'm setting that hook and getting all excited when I see that take, I'm not going to break it off on the hook set, which has happened before. Yeah, so this is just kind of like a rapid fire tips that I've learned over the years of fishing these fish. A lot of these can just be applied to brook trout or lake trout fisheries as well. But really do your best to fish the conditions. Time of day, really important. Different times of year, I think time of day that you're fishing and putting your angling effort into can really make all the difference. I think bite windows, in all my fishing, bite windows are huge. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's really just that fish seem to feed, and they all seem to feed together at very specific times of day. Sometimes it's temperature driven, sometimes it's food source driven, sometimes it's light driven. It can be really hard to figure out, at least with the char species that we're talking about mostly today, and including the splake. In the spring, no matter what, I like morning. Morning's always good. It's always worthwhile to try it in the morning. That's usually when the wind has died down and you can just kind of paddle around and get to your spots easier as well. But then usually midday can be kind of tough, especially if it's a really sunny day. But even if it's a really sunny day, usually by about 3, 4, 5 o'clock, there's something happens. That light starts to get a little lower, even though it's been warm all day. Maybe too, it's that temperature that's really rising. The temperature in a cold lake and the insects and everything are starting to get active. That's a sweet spot. That's a great time of day to really focus all your energy. So when you're camping and you might have had a few drinks the night before or anything like that, if you're going to put all your angling effort into only a few hours in the day, I think that's the time to do it in the spring. In the fall, again, I've had a lot of success kind of throughout the day. Timing of the day, again, morning is good, as well as even into the evening can be quite good in the fall. As far as water clarity, crystal clear lakes have really short bite windows. So if it's a really clear lake and it's a nice bluebird day, you're going to be wanting to target those fish early morning, later in the day. If they're cloudy lake, where lots of tannin in the water, a little darker water, you're more likely to have success later into the day as well. And I think that's just because the fish are hunting for longer periods at that time. They're more comfortable, they're out, they're looking for food. And so the type of water clarity that you have is always going to impact how the fish respond. As far as air temperature and barometric pressure are concerned, I mean, no surprise here. Sunny, warm spring days can be great. I don't find there's so much of a light sensitive fish like you might think of, like a brown trout might be. I've had some really great days when it is very sunny out. In the fall, though, really cloudy, awful weather days can be amazing. My best fishing really has all been in the fall during terrible weather. You can speculate why that might be. Are they sensing that the winter's coming, they got to fatten up? I'm not sure. Something's driving them to feed. And even if the weather's really awful, you can have some really good days. Wind conditions. Now, everybody else, including myself, loves to be out on a nice calm lake when it looks like glass. This might not be the best time to be fishing. It's a nice time to be paddling and a nice time to be casting, but oftentimes when you have a little bit of wind on the water and a little bit of chop, it's going to push the prey around. And if you can find some windy points where that bait is getting trapped, that would be a place to look and hope that those predatory fish are following those bait, and you're hopefully going to get into some of those fish. One thing I'd just like to suggest is, if you don't do it already, keep a logbook. So keep track of the conditions. There's not a lot written about splake fishing on the soft water, so your own data can be very helpful determining best time to go. So presenting the fly, this is how I like to do it and what I've found a lot of success with. Starting shallow. That's always going to be my first place I start. Again, I'm primarily talking about spring and fall. So starting in the top layer of the water column, and then gradually getting deeper and gradually getting slowing down your presentation. Active presentations have really been extremely successful for me. An intermediate line, fishing a very erratic strip, even in the coldest conditions, seems to elicit a response from these fish. Splake are very cold water predators, so even though we might be thinking it's extremely cold and what kind of fish is going to bite when it's snowing out, well, you might be very surprised. The other thing is that bright flies fish really fast. You can get territorial responses out of these fish, especially into the fall. Throwing your oranges and chartreuses, even though it looks like nothing natural to those fish, it's a very good way to catch them, and you're going to see some interest. I can almost guarantee it. This is a really huge tip that I'd like to just offer up anybody who might try this, is the schooling behavior of the fish is really important to recognize. So if you do catch one, there's something really funny that happens. If you catch one, at least for me, you very rarely start catching a whole bunch all at once. That almost never happens. I don't know if that's because they're shy and they're quite a spooky fish. I've had a lot of times brook trout fishing where you catch one and you might have like an hour of just a frenzy of activity. With Splake, it's typically you catch one fish, maybe two fish, and then there's nothing. But the best thing to do in that scenario is to leave the spot, go make a coffee or go try another area of the lake, come back a few hours later, and almost always I pick up another fish or two in that same spot by resting in. I'm not sure if they're not moving, or I guess they could be moving and then that wouldn't happen. But I think what's happening is that they get spooked and they just kind of shut down. And then by resting them, they come back and you catch another fish. So that's a huge tip that I'd like to offer everybody if you're going to try this. The other really important piece of information is fish right to the rod tip. These fish, I think it's that lake trout genetics in them. They love to follow that fly. Don't pull it out of the water too early. Don't just fish it halfway back to the canoe or the boat or wherever. You want to make sure that you're bringing that fly all the way up to the boat, because a lot of the eats are right beside the boat. It's actually very, very visual. The only fish I've ever seen do that similarly is a bull trout. They will just chase a fly for so long like that and then eat right at your feet. These fish absolutely do that as well. And it's pretty exciting when you see those big red peck fins coming in and chasing your fly. So keep your eyes on the water. I did mention trolling very briefly, but while it's not a typical way of fly fishing, if you have no idea where these fish could be and you're not having a lot of success, simply casting a streamer out behind either a canoe or your float tube and then paddling around the lake is a really good way to search them out. Most of these lakes are not very big, so you can usually cover most of the lake, or at least a lot of the points of interest, by doing this, and it'll at least give you an idea as to what kind of structure these fish are holding to. And then the last point I'll make is just fighting the fish. They're so good at throwing a hook, much like a brook trout. If you get their head up and they're thrashing around, you're likely going to throw that hook. So letting them have their head down in the water and keeping them down before really bringing them up to the net is really, really important. So don't just pull it right to the surface and let them roll around. They're going to throw that hook. Okay, a couple notes on fly selection, because this is the fun stuff. As I've kind of mentioned a million times now, these fish are primarily eating minnows. I think fishing streamers is the way to go. You want to bring a variety of sizes. And the other thing is that Splake will take a much larger size than what you think. I know the first time that I was having success with them on the fly, I looked at my fly box and I had some pretty big flies, and I decided just to try them, and those were the most successful flies of the trip. A lot of the smaller stuff that you might think, oh, these are perfect brook trout flies, they were not as successful as these bigger minnow imitations. Fish them like you would smallmouth bass. So a lot of your smallmouth bass flies, they're going to be very effective for trying to catch Splake. I break them down into two categories: natural colors and attractor colors. The naturals are your more imitative flies. So if you're fishing really shallow water, sticking with your olives, tans, whites, grizzlies, these are going to match the forage, which is a lot of the time it's perch. If you're fishing deep water, like if you're fishing in the summertime down near the thermocline, fishing more white, blue, silver, where those ciscos and other bait fish might live, that would be a more imitative way to fish. Fishing attractor, though, is never a bad way to go. Fall is a very good time to do that, but really any time of year fishing a chartreuse or a bright orange fly can be really, really successful. Next one. What I like to do is I like to just kind of copy what some of the conventional anglers do. So really, a lot of the conventional anglers that I know that have a lot of success fishing these are fishing spoons and spinners, hard body baits like rapalas and live targets that are mimicking minnow imitations, and then jigs. So my fly box is really going to replicate what these guys are doing. So next slide. So in order to try to replicate what a spinner or a spoon does, where it's dancing and fluttering all over the place and flashing everywhere, I use a lot of muddler type flies. That one muddler is essentially like a marabou muddler, but it's tied entirely out of flash with a deer hair head on it. That's a great fly that I've caught lots and lots of different char on, as well as, of course, the zoo cougar, which, if you know me, that's like one of my favorite flies. It has been forever. It's been around forever. And that mallard flank that sits on the back of the fly really kind of cups over the top of the body of the fly and allows it to swoon just like a spoon would. These flies are all unweighted, mind you, and they really, when on a strip, they're really going to dive and dance, and I think that's really important as opposed to like a straight dropping of a jig. And that's what I like about those patterns. These patterns are bait fish imitations, so a little bit closer to what the forage might look like. Of course, you got Scotty's McFly in that photograph, which I think every Ontario angler probably knows by now. That's just a great fly for catching everything, and all the marabou and bright orange and white. It's just a highly visible color that looks like some of the bait fish that exist, and it's a great fly to fish. Just get the next one. These are probably my favorite flies to fish, and these are perch imitations. As I mentioned previously, these fish are really eating a lot of perch in lakes that have perch. And so by tying flies to mimic that forage, it really just gives me a lot of confidence in what I'm fishing. And I personally think they just tend to work better if I'm mimicking that actual forage those fish are eating. So a lot of the perch, there's some gold flash in there. You got some EP fiber over some of the head and whatever bucktail or synthetic you like to tie your bait fish imitations in. Tying them in the olives, yellows, a little bit of white for the bellies. You probably can't go wrong.
And you say largest is 5-inch. Average size for these is what, 3 inches? Or?
Yeah, about 3.5 inches probably. I'd say is a safe bet. Yeah, most of the flies would be about 3.5 inches or so, but I wouldn't hesitate to put a 5-inch fly on for sure. Yeah. Switching gears a little bit though, so going to a little bit slower of a presentation, really mimicking like some of the bucktail jigs that some of the anglers throw for lake trout and for some of the char in these back lakes. Really, you can't beat a clouser. Clousers catch everything, as everyone knows. But if I'm going to fish some more aggressive species like a splake, I'll often beef that up to a half and half. So half and half is simply borrowing from Lefty's Deceiver, saddle hackle tails, which give the fly a little bit more bulk, and then tying your bucktail and lead eyes in at the front. That's just a bigger profile. It's something that I would lean towards a little bit more if I was fishing an aggressive species like splake or lake trout. And then, of course, you really can't have a fly box that doesn't have a woolly bugger in it. One of my favorite things to do is to take some of these other imitations that I've mentioned just previously, but then I'll almost always drop a bugger off the back. And I have caught splake on woolly buggers. It hasn't been as effective as, say, the woolly bugger has been for me for species like brook trout. But a woolly bugger really just can't beat a woolly bugger. I call them woolly bugger type flies because I always tie them with all kinds of different materials and stuff. And you can get into the specifics of what the names are when you change one hackle versus another. But marabou tail and some kind of body, you really can't beat it for just about anything that swims. Yeah. Some references there for some of the things I cited. And my final slide there is me dropping a splake. Beautiful. Yeah. So anyway, that's my presentation, guys. I hope there's something of value there for a lot of you guys that were interested. I really appreciate everybody coming and listening to me talk about this. But if there's any questions or anything like that, I'd love to answer. Yeah, I think we might get a couple here at the last second. Sorry, we actually had a question from a while back from Keith that I guess we missed. What was the name for a brown mix lake? I'm not sure if you mean a brown trout and a lake trout. I'm not sure if that exists. I've never heard of that. I haven't heard of that. Tiger trout, though. And a brook trout. Yeah, brown and brookie is a tiger trout. And they're really impressive fish. I've never caught one. It's interesting, though, because that is the only species that I can think of off the top of my head that you have a trout mixed with a char and the tiger. And I wonder if it's possible to do it with a brown eye lake trout. No one's tried. I'm sure it's been tried somewhere, but I don't know. Yeah, I really like the tiger trout though. I'd love to get one day. I'd love an opportunity to go catch them. I know some people who have actually caught them on the credit. Like me too. I've heard a few stories about that too. I believe those are sterile once they're brought into existence. They are sterile, yeah. Which would make sense because they are completely different genus, right? Yeah, exactly. Don was asking what hook sizes you're tying on for the most part. Yeah, so for the most part, I would say if I'm talking about the baitfish type flies, or I'm talking about them just a little bigger, typically a 2 would be normal, even a 1 or a 2. That's usually what I'm tying on. When you saw the woolly buggers and clousers, they're a little smaller. They're probably about a size 4. Yeah, sweet. Cool. Well, that's all the questions that
that we've got at the moment. But if anyone has questions going forward, you can always reach us at the shop. Or I think, Nick, you put out there before that folks can reach out to you. How would they do that?
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of you guys know that I just post a ton of pictures on social media of just fish and flies and the whole fishing experience as a whole. So if I don't know you already, reach out anytime. You can find me on there. My Instagram handle is Salmographer, so SALMOGRAPHER, and you can get at me there. And I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what you think of this type of fishery. And if there's people out there that have fished this species before, especially on the fly, I'd love to hear from you. Because as I was saying, there's really just not a lot of information out there, which is why I felt confident enough in presenting this to you, because there really just is nothing. And we have a lot of lakes where this is available. So I really hope that you guys will at least give it a shot, or and let me know how you do.